It's time.
Yes, yes, yes. It is time. Welcome in, welcome in, welcome back to the War Room on the Front Office Podcast. I'm your host, Pistols. The day is a historic day. I know it has nothing to do with football, but the Buffalo Sabres are in the playoffs after a 14-year drought. It's insane. The place is going crazy. We'd love to see it. But I appreciate you for being here on the Front Office Podcast. Welcome in. Today is a really, really fun episode for me. Today we're going to talk about why rankings actually hurt you in the long run, as opposed to just staring at a list and drafting off of that. There's thinking behind it. There's a philosophy behind it. Rankings will hurt you in the end. Mark my words. Most managers will rely on them, and that's exactly why they get stuck, because rankings are static. Rankings are just a static list, and your draft is as dynamic as they come. The moment that a pick happens, everything changes. The whole philosophy of the draft is out the window. Um, you know, the first problem in any draft day is walking in with a list. When you have a list, all you're doing is looking at the next available player. You're crossing names off that have been picked, and at the end of the day, you're just left with the list of, and you have no idea what you're looking at. Um, Rankings will only trap you. As you're on the clock, as you're getting ready to make your pick, that guy is sitting there on a sheet of paper, and then somebody drafts it before you, and what, you just move on to the next name on the list because you think that's the way that you should. In my experience, that has never been a good strategy. Relying on that list and relying on that ranking sheet that you print out of the top 300 players in fantasy football just never works out. Everything changes the moment that a pick happens. Drafts are dynamic. Rankings are already outdated as soon as somebody makes a pick. So bringing those lists in are great, and it's one of those things that a lot of people feel comfortable with. But instead of having a ranking list, I much prefer a tier list, and that's something that you have to sit down and think about and do prior to the draft. Way before draft day, it's not as simple as just printing out, Googling or going to ESPN or whatever sports source that you use to print out the top list of player rankings in fantasy football this year. It's just not a good way to go. But and I understand why, because rankings feel safe. Why they feel safe is because they give you that sense of control. They tell you, who the next available player is. They tell you who's coming off the board or who should come off the board based on how everything's drafting. But a lot of the times, drafts just don't go according to plan. So when you have that plan and something goes awry, it's just, that's when you start forcing picks, and the having a ranking list just removes the actual decision making out of any draft. You're not thinking for yourself anymore. You're just reading a list. But it's a mindset thing, and I understand why. Early on in my days of fantasy football, I've been playing fantasy football for 20 years. Early on, yeah, I used a ranking list. I didn't know what fantasy football was going to do and how to play it, or what I'm supposed to be doing. Of course, now we have all the websites that keep track of all the stats and everything for us, but you had to rely on I had to rely on a ranking list. I can tell you, I didn't win early on when I started playing fantasy football. I didn't start winning until honestly probably the last 5 years of playing fantasy football, when I started to learn the philosophy behind fantasy football and how to think, and not just go according to some list that some random expert generated because everybody thinks that these guys know what they're talking about, which, don't get me wrong, they do know what they're talking about. But for the most part, when it comes to fantasy football, there are millions and millions of players every single year. most of those people are relying on lists, but the guys that really do well, and you see these guys that, go to some fantasy football championship put on by like DraftKings or FanDuel or anything like that. It's just that those guys know how to think. They know where the value is. They create a tier list. They have exactly what they need, and how their rosters are going to be constructed, and these guys just, they have a different way of thinking. And hopefully that's what I bring to the table here, is kind of go through the thought process on why we make the decisions that we make, and how to make the decisions when they're presented to us. Why? So the reason why that ranking lists fail in real time is because your draft doesn't follow a list. You're drafting with a bunch of other players who have their own mindset, and when something goes wrong, everything just breaks into chaos. Your draft doesn't follow a list. The runs happen, the values shift, the positions dry up. Rankings can break up a positional run. If you're looking, especially, I talk about the tight ends a lot, and how irrelevant they're becoming in fantasy football, but there are only a few in fantasy football that are elite tight ends that are going to score you points week in and week out. If someone starts taking tight ends early, you kind of have to adjust and adapt your strategy, and otherwise you're going to be left in the dust. By going by that ranking list, now if someone takes a tight end in the second round or the third round, well, they're probably not high up on the ranking list, so you're kind of panicking a little bit. You're going to miss out on that position, and that goes with any position. Wide receiver, running back, quarterback. Runs can happen at any time. You don't know when they're going to happen. You kind of just have to feel out the draft and how it's going to fall. Instead of using a ranking list, and I talk about it a lot, and I talked about it in a few episodes ago, use a tier list. Use that structure, use the flexibility. Tiers show you where decisions actually matter. If you have, that tier list, your elite guys, your top, use wide receiver, for example, you have your top wide receivers, you have your elite ones, the ones that are guaranteed points every single week. Then you have your next group that, you're looking at, maybe wide receiver 2, and you have another group, wide receiver 3, and then maybe you have another group that you fit your flex guys in. All these things have to go through your head when you're drafting, especially when you're building up a tier list and you're not relying on the rankings as much. Like I said, tight end probably has the biggest drop off positionally. There's only a few guys in the league now that will probably be pretty consistent. Next would be your running back fall off. When you see those guys, when you see other guys in your draft trying to, if somebody drafted 3 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds, then they are probably going to be scrambling for a running back in the 4th round, depending on how they want their roster to be structured. But for the most part, when that drop off happens, you have to be able to structurally and be flexible with your drafting mindset, and how to adjust on the fly, because your draft's not going to wait. Most drafts, you probably only have maybe 60 to 90 seconds to make a pick, and maybe a minute and a half sounds like a long time, but I tell you, when you're on the clock, it is not a long time, because if you have to sit there and think about every little thing that you're going to do, you're going to run out of time pretty quickly, and then even more panic is going to set in. Being able to have those lists in front of you that okay, where am I in the draft? What just happened? This is my next pick. In that order. It has to happen fast, otherwise you're just going to run out of time and you're just not going to be happy with your draft. Ask yourself this when you're on the clock, okay? Don't ask who's next on the list. Ask, where is the value now? So, basically when you get to, we'll say, I don't know, fourth round, and someone takes a quarterback. Okay. In my opinion, and I've said this before, quarterbacks going that early is insane. There are better skill position guys out there that will help you win fantasy football leagues beyond that round. And a quarterback is a very stable position in the NFL. I always tend to draft guys probably in the 10th, 11th round is when I get my first quarterback. Usually, I'm very happy with a Trevor Lawrence or a Dak Prescott or even Matthew Stafford, even though he just won MVP, so he might go a little bit higher in this upcoming draft just based on that. But even then, that's still not the right way to think about it. Going based on last year's stats, that's usually a no-no. You have to look at the situation. You have to look at everything around that position. Now, in my opinion, I am going to make a tier list for you guys at some point when we get a little bit closer to draft season and fantasy football and the start of the season and all that fun stuff. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm gonna have Matthew Stafford pretty high up on my list because his situation is perfectly stable. He's got two great receivers in Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. They have some guys that fill in every now and again, like Tutu Atwell, which I don't know if he's still there or not, but their surrounding guys are pretty solid. And then you got some tight ends like Cody Parkinson and Tyler Higbee. Those guys were a solid. They played a solid role, especially Cody Parkinson late in the season. And they have two really good running backs in Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. They've come to kind of split their time on the field, but I'll tell you right now, Matt Stafford's going to be pretty up there on my tier list. It's just a stable quarterback situation. The Rams are a very good team. They have a very good head coach in Sean McVay. And I expect Matt Stafford to put up MVP numbers again. But you have to ask yourself where that value is. Now, for me, like I said, I don't find value in the quarterback position in round 4 or 5, anywhere before round 10. Which leads me to my main point is that allowing people to pick those guys super early. And now don't get me wrong, they're going to get guys like Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts and these guys, and Jaden Daniels is probably still up there. That's fine. They can have those guys. But what that does is that now takes away a draft pick at a position of need. If somebody needs a wide receiver, but they go quarterback instead, then now all they're doing is they're taking away a pick at the wide receiver position, and they're probably going to be left with something way beyond the value. The value isn't as high, now, because I'm assuming they're probably looking for depth at that point. If they've already drafted, 3 wide receivers or 2 wide receivers or whatever the case may be, it's just you have to ask yourself where that value is. And it goes round by round. Value changes round after round, pick after pick. Actually, your value is going to shift, and that's kind of the premise of why the tier list is a little bit better than a ranking list. Because sure, your number one guy is going to be, if I were to guess who the top 100 fantasy football players going into 2026, 2027 season are, I'm guessing you're going to have like your Jahmyr Gibbs, your Jamar Chase, your Bijan Robinson's up at the top. Puka Nacua is probably up there. But if separating them into tiers will make draft day so much simpler. Control versus reaction. Rankings make you reactive. Okay. Framework makes you proactive. Jesus, if I can gather my thoughts. One follows the draft, one understands it. Okay. Rankings, and what I mean by that, rankings are reactive. being reactive to a ranking list is typical, right? That's kind of what everybody's used to when they draft fantasy football. It's okay, I have a ranking list of my top 20 guys, my top 100 guys, whatever it might be. As I go through this draft, you're seeing these guys get drafted by other players in the league with every pick, right? Crossing them off your list so you don't draft them and this and that. And now all you're doing is just, okay, well, this is the next best available guy. He must help me win fantasy football. Well, what if it was, in this case, Justin Jefferson, who didn't have a stable quarterback position, and you drafted him in the first round because your list told you to, and then you got fourth round production out of him, and he probably didn't win you a league this year. I'm guessing that if you won fantasy football, Justin Jefferson was not on your team this year. And that's just the way cookie crumbles. Another guy, Saquon Barkley, he had a very down season. We seen him almost 2,100 yards rushing a season ago. When it gets to 2025, 2026 season, he barely cracks 1,000. Maybe I think he was like 1,100 or so. That's a pretty big difference in yards from year to year, and just basing it on a list, you were probably unhappy with Saquon Barkley and the roller coaster that he put you through. I know I was, because I did have him on some of my teams, but it wasn't. I didn't reach for him. I didn't go by a list. I made the mistake of drafting based on the 2,000-yard season, thinking, okay, they pretty much found their identity. Of course, you can't really know when a team is going to lose their identity and kind of miss their opportunities. But in any case, having a good framework makes you proactive. And that's the difference between reactive control versus reaction. Having a framework puts you in control of the draft. Having the tier list puts you in control of the draft. Understanding the situation at hand and who you're getting ready to draft, that is going to make draft day so much simpler. I promise you will not panic. I promise you that you will not cause chaos in your head going, I shouldn't have taken that guy, or I should have taken this guy. It starts with roster construction, and we're going to get into that, and I believe I have a couple episodes before that, but we are going to get into roster construction and how you want your rosters to be built and what you should be looking for. Of course, I am no expert, and I understand that, but the way to think about it is to have a good foundation, have a good framework to make everything just run so smoothly. Rankings don't win leagues. Decision making does. The better decisions that you make, the better off you're going to be. If you just rely on a tier list, or a ranking list, then you're going to be in trouble. Creating that tier list is going to be 10 times better for you. Stop following the list. Start thinking for yourself. Make your own decisions. Make informed decisions. Start thinking the way that you should be thinking. Prepare now, win later. I appreciate you guys for joining me for this episode. It is a shorter episode today. There's Sabres playoff hockey that I need to get to watching. But before we do that, thank you guys for joining me in the War Room. I am your host, Pistols. This is the Front Office Podcast. We'll catch you guys on the next one.